The last thing I felt was the wind whistling past my ears, a terrifying, weightless second before the marble pavement rose up to claim me. I remembered the coldness in Luis's eyes as he watched me slip over the railing. I remembered the sound of my own voice screaming, a sound cut short by a bone-shattering thud. Then, there was only darkness and a searing, white-hot pain that faded into a heavy, numbing silence. Valentina? 5 minutes to set. They're ready for the balcony scene. The voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. I gasped, my lungs burning as they filled with air. I wasn't cold. I wasn't on the pavement. I was sitting in a plush, velvet chair. The smell of burnt espresso and expensive hairspray hit me with the force of a physical blow. I blinked, my vision blurring as I stared into a mirror lined with bright, clinical light bulbs. My face, the face of the Queen of Soaps, was painted in dramatic, tragic makeup. Dark coal eyes, a pale lip, and hair curled into perfect, cascading waves. I looked exactly as I had on the day everything began to fall apart. "Valentina, honey, did you hear me?" my assistant, Carla, asked as she poked her head into the trailer. She looked younger, her face free of the stress that had lined it during my final, disgraced months. I'm coming," I whispered, my voice trembling. I touched my neck, expecting to feel the bruises Luis had left during our final argument, but my skin was smooth. The door to the trailer swung open, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Luis walked in, looking polished in his designer suit, his smile as sharp and hollow as a shark's. This was the man who had managed my career into the ground while pretending to be my savior. This was my murderer. "There's my star," Luis said, walking over and placing his hands on my shoulders. I flinched, a jolt of pure electricity racing through my spine. Nervous about the death scene? Don't be. It's the season finale. The ratings will be astronomical. Just give them that signature Valentina Vega heartbreak. "The death scene," I repeated, my heart hammering against my ribs. In the show Sombras do Amor, my character was pushed off a balcony. It was the scene that made me a legend. In real life, it was how he had finished me. "You're pale, Val," Luis said, his thumb grazing my cheek in a way that made me want to scream. "Do you need a drink? A little something to take the edge off? You know I always have your vitamin drops ready." I looked at the small crystal glass on the vanity. Those vitamin drops. The sedatives he used to keep me compliant and foggy-headed while he forged my signature on contracts and leaked those horrific, fake videos to the tabloids. In my previous life, I had swallowed them without question. "No," I said, my voice gaining a hard, icy edge. "I'm perfectly clear-headed, Luis. In fact, I've never seen things more clearly in my life." He frowned, his eyes narrowing. "Don't get temperamental on me now. We have a lot riding on today. After this, we have that meeting with the network about your contract renewal. I've already told them we want double the salary." "We?" I asked, standing up so I could look him in the eye. I was wearing 4-inch heels. I was nearly as tall as he was. "You mean I want the salary and you want the 20% commission?" Luis laughed, but the sound was tight. "What's gotten into you? We're a team, Val. Always have been. Now get to set. The director is waiting." As he walked out, I gripped the edge of the vanity until my knuckles turned white. I wasn't dead. I was back. The universe had given me the script for my own life, and this time, I was going to be the one who wrote the ending. The sound stages of IBC Network were a labyrinth of cables, artificial walls, and the frantic energy of 100 people trying to create a dream. As I walked toward stage 4, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. Every person who waved at me, every makeup artist who touched up my powder, was someone I had seen turn their back on me when the scandals hit. The balcony was a high-tech set built 20 feet above a sea of crash pads and green screens. It looked terrifyingly familiar. "Valentina, darling, you look tragic." "Perfect," the director, Sergio, shouted from his chair. "Luis, tell her we need the tears to be real this time. No glycerin." "She's ready, Sergio," Luis said, leaning against a lighting rig, his phone already glued to his ear.
He wasn't even looking at me.
He was likely already talking to the leak contacts he used to sabotage my reputation. I climbed the stairs to the set piece, my legs feeling like lead. As I reached the top, I felt a heavy gaze on me. I turned my head and saw a group of men in dark, expensive suits standing near the monitors. In the center was Alejandro Santoro. He was the mogul who owned the entire network, a man known for his ruthless business sense and his legendary disdain for the frivolity of soap operas. He was brooding, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that looked like they could see through steel. In my past life, he had been the one to sign the order to blacklist me. I had hated him for it. But now, seeing him, I realized he hadn't been the villain. He had just seen the evidence Luis had manufactured and acted to protect his company. Alejandro's eyes met mine. He didn't smile. He just watched me with a curious, intense focus. Action, Sergio yelled. I stepped onto the fake balcony. The actor playing my betrayer, a handsome boy who was nothing compared to the monster standing below in the shadows, began his dialogue. "I never loved you, Isabella," he shouted. "It was always about the money. In the original script, I was supposed to beg. I was supposed to weep and plead for my life. But as I looked down and saw Luis checking his watch, a cold, white-hot fury erupted in my chest. I didn't beg. Then take the money," I said, my voice cold and resonant, vibrating through the studio. I stepped toward the edge, my eyes locked on the actor. "Take it and rot. Because a woman like me is a fire you aren't brave enough to stand in." The set went silent. This wasn't the line. "Valentina," the actor whispered, breaking character. "Keep going," Sergio hissed from the floor. I turned my head and looked directly into the camera, directly at Alejandro Santoro. I let a single tear fall, not of sorrow, but of pure, unadulterated defiance. Then, I let the actor push me. I fell backward into the darkness, landing on the pads with a grace I hadn't possessed in my first life.
Cut.
My God, Valentina, that was incredible, Sergio screamed. I sat up, pushing my hair back. Luis was already jogging toward me, a look of confusion and anger on his face. "What was that?" Luis hissed as he reached the pads. "You changed the lines. You made the character look strong. She's supposed to be a victim, Valentina. Victims sell." "Maybe I'm tired of being a victim, Luis," I said, stepping off the pads and brushing past him. I headed straight toward the monitors, where Alejandro Santoro was still standing. The people around him parted like the Red Sea. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable. "That was a bold choice, Miss Vega," Alejandro said. His voice was a deep, smooth baritone that felt like velvet over gravel. "The script was lacking truth, Mr. Santoro," I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Sometimes, the woman who falls is the only one who truly knows how to rise." Alejandro tilted his head, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, the first time I had ever seen it. "I've always found soap operas to be predictable. You just made things interesting." "I'm just getting started," I said. The adrenaline of the set began to fade as I returned to my trailer, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. I knew exactly what Luis was doing right now. In the original timeline, this was the afternoon he accidentally left his laptop open, allowing me to see a fabricated video of myself apparently mocking the network's fans. It had been the first domino to fall. I entered the trailer and saw his briefcase sitting on the leather sofa. My hands shook as I reached for it. "Looking for something, Val?" I spun around. Luis was leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed. He had that smug, paternalistic look on his face that used to make me feel safe.
Now, it made me sick.
"I was looking for my contract," I lied, my voice steady. "I want to read the fine print before the meeting with Alejandro." "I handle the contracts, remember?" Luis said, walking into the small space. He grabbed the briefcase and moved it to the desk. "You just focus on being beautiful and memorizing lines. I've got the heavy lifting covered." "I think I'd like to do some lifting of my own," I said. "I'm the one on the screen, Luis. It's my face, my reputation." And it's my brain that kept that reputation alive when you were just a girl from the provinces, he snapped, his temper finally fraying. He caught himself and softened his tone. Look, I'm just trying to protect you. There are people at the network, people like Santoro, who would replace you in a heartbeat if they thought you were difficult. I'm the only one in your corner. Is that right? I asked. The only one? The only one, he said, stepping closer and kissing my forehead. I felt a wave of revulsion. I have to run to the editing bay to check the dailies.
Stay here. Rest.
And take your drops, Valentina. You look high-strung. He walked out, locking the trailer door from the outside, a habit he claimed was for my safety against fans. I waited until I heard his footsteps fade. Then I pulled a small, hidden set of lockpicks from my makeup kit. I had learned how to use them for a role as a cat burglar years ago. I never thought they'd save my life.
Click.
The door opened. I didn't go to the editing bay. I went to the production office, slipping through the back halls. I knew Luis used the office's high-speed server to upload his leaks. I found the door to his private office and slipped inside. His computer was on. I moved the mouse, my heart hammering. I found a hidden folder titled VV, Final Project. I clicked. My breath hitched. There they were. Dozens of raw files, videos of me sleeping, clips of me crying in private, all spliced together with audio recordings of someone who sounded exactly like me saying horrible things about the IBC staff. He was using a voice impersonator app and sophisticated editing. You bastard, I whispered. But there was more. I found a subfolder titled The Santoro Deal. Luis wasn't just ruining me. He was planning to leak proof that I was stealing from the network's charity fund, then discover it himself to look like the hero. He was going to use my downfall to negotiate a permanent executive position for himself under Alejandro. Suddenly, I heard the jingle of keys outside the door. I'm telling you, the footage is gold. Luis's voice boomed from the hallway. Once she's out, we can transition the brand. I had no time to leave. I scrambled under the massive mahogany desk, pulling my skirts in tight. The door opened. Luis walked in, followed by one of his cronies from the marketing department. She's getting erratic, Luis said, his boots inches from my face. That stunt on the balcony today? She's starting to think for herself. We need to move up the timeline. I want the first scandal video on the blogs by tonight. Is she going to be a problem? The other man asked. Valentina? Luis laughed, a cold, jagged sound. She's a puppet. I've got her so drugged and gaslit, she won't know which way is up until she's signing the retirement papers I put in front of her. She's my golden goose, and I'm about to cook her. They left a few minutes later, the click of the lock sounding like a gunshot. I crawled out from under the desk, my face tear-streaked but my eyes burning with a new, lethal light. I didn't just have memories now. I had proof. I grabbed a thumb drive from the desk and began copying the files. As the progress bar crawled toward 100%, I realized I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone with more power than Luis. I needed a shark of my own. Alejandro Santoro's office was at the top of the IBC tower, a glass and steel fortress that looked out over the city like a throne room. I didn't have an appointment. I didn't have permission. But I had the Queen of Soap's smile, and the security guards were too starstruck to stop me. I pushed past his startled secretary and walked into the office. Alejandro was standing by the window, his back to me. I told you I wasn't to be disturbed, Marcus, Alejandro said, his voice dropping like a heavy stone. Marcus is busy being shocked, I said. Alejandro turned. He didn't look angry. He looked intrigued. He leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms over his broad chest. Miss Vega, I assume this isn't about your dressing room's lighting. I think we both know I don't care about lighting right now, I said, walking to his desk and tossing the thumb drive onto the polished surface. You don't like me, Mr. Santoro. You think I'm a shallow, manufactured product of your network's lowest common denominator. I value efficiency and integrity, Alejandro said. Your product brings in revenue, but your personal drama, the rumors your manager hints at, is a liability I'm preparing to cut. Luis isn't hinting at rumors, I said, stepping closer. He's manufacturing them. That drive contains the fake videos he's been preparing to ruin my career. It also contains evidence that he's been embezzling from your charity foundation and trying to pin it on me. Alejandro's expression didn't change, but I saw his eyes sharpen. He picked up the drive, turning it over in his fingers. Why bring this to me? Why not the police? Why not the press? Because you hate Luis, I said. And because I want more than just his arrest. I want him erased. I want him blacklisted so thoroughly he can't get a job selling popcorn at a movie theater. And in exchange, I want something from you. You're a bold woman, Alejandro said, walking to his computer and inserting the drive. What could the Queen of Soaps possibly want from me? I want my own production company, I said. I want to move behind the camera. I want to produce stories that have the truth you claim to value. I want to be the boss, Alejandro. No more managers. No more vitamin drops. No more being told how to die on a balcony. As the files opened, Alejandro's face went grim. He watched the spliced videos, the impersonation software, and the spreadsheets of the stolen money. The silence in the room was deafening. He was going to push you, Alejandro whispered, his eyes finally meeting mine. There was a flicker of something, empathy, respect, in his gaze. He was going to destroy a human being for a promotion. He already did, I said, my voice barely a whisper. In a way you wouldn't believe. Alejandro stood up. He was much taller than he had seemed on set. He walked around the desk until he was standing directly in front of me. He reached out, his hand hesitating before he gently tucked his stray hair behind my ear. I've spent years thinking you were a spoiled child, Valentina, he said. I apologize. I was looking at the puppet, not the woman pulling the strings. Do we have a deal? I asked. We have more than a deal, Alejandro said. We have a war. And I've never lost one yet. The next few days were the most grueling performance of my life, far more demanding than any three-act tragedy I had filmed for the network. To the world, and especially to Luis, I had to remain the Queen of Soaps, the fragile, fading starlet who was slowly losing her grip on reality. I played the part to perfection, leaning into the tremors in my hands and the wide, vacant stare I had once seen in the mirror during my first life's final months. It was a dangerous game of cat and mouse, but this time, the mouse was wearing a wire. You look tired, Val. Did you have those nightmares again? Luis asked as he entered my trailer on Tuesday morning. He didn't wait for an answer before reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small, amber vial. I sat at my vanity, staring at my reflection. I looked pale, a trick of light-reflecting powder and clever shading. I can't sleep, Luis, I whispered, my voice intentionally thin and airy. Everything feels so loud lately. The fans, the cameras, sometimes I feel like I'm still falling. That's just the stress of the finale, he said, unscrewing the cap with a practiced, clinical flick of his thumb. He poured a glass of water and dropped 2 blue pills into my palm. Take your vitamins. They'll help quiet the noise. You know I'm the only one who can keep you steady. I looked at the pills, the same sedatives that had turned my brain to mush in the past, making me easy to manipulate, easy to gaslight, and eventually, easy to kill. What would I do without you, Luis? I asked, looking at him with a gaze that I made sure was filled with pathetic, desperate gratitude. You'd be a memory, Querida, he said, patting my cheek with a condescending smile.
Now, drink up.
I have a meeting with the marketing team to discuss the narrative for your upcoming hiatus. I raised the glass to my lips, tilted my head back, and let the water hit my throat.
But the pills didn't go down.
I had practiced this for hours in front of a mirror at home. I tucked them expertly into the side of my cheek, under the tongue, while I swallowed the water with a loud, convincing gulp. Good girl, Luis said. He turned his back to check his reflection in the mirror, smoothing his hair. I'm telling the press you're taking a break for exhaustion. It keeps the mystery alive. And it makes them more sympathetic when the other news breaks. I felt the cold prickle of the microphone taped to my ribs, hidden beneath the heavy silk of my robe. The transmitter was a tiny, high-tech sliver provided by Alejandro's security team. Every word Luis spoke, every subtle threat, and every admission of his control was being recorded and sent directly to a secure server. "What other news, Luis?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly, half-act, half-genuine terror at how easily he discarded my humanity. "Don't worry your pretty head about it," he said, grabbing his briefcase. "Just stay in the trailer. Don't talk to anyone from the crew. They're all vultures, Val. They want to see you fail. Only I want you to win." As the door clicked shut and I heard the familiar sound of the external lock turning, I spat the pills into a tissue and flushed them down the tiny trailer toilet. My heart was racing. I wasn't drugged, but I was intoxicated on a different kind of power. The power of knowing exactly what the villain was going to do next. That night, at 2 a.m., I slipped out of my apartment through the service entrance, wearing a hooded trench coat and dark glasses. A black SUV was idling 3 blocks away, its lights off. I climbed into the back seat, where the air was cool and smelled of expensive leather and cedarwood. "You're late," Alejandro Santoro said. He was sitting in the corner, the blue light from his tablet illuminating the sharp, handsome angles of his face. "Luis stayed late to help me go over my lines," I said, sliding into the seat beside him. I had to wait until he thought the sedatives had kicked in. Alejandro handed me a thermos of hot coffee. "We got the recording from this morning." His narrative comment is gold. "Our legal team says it shows clear intent to disparage your reputation for financial gain." "It's not enough," I said, looking him in the eye. "He hasn't mentioned the fake videos yet. He only talks about those with his contact in marketing, a man named Marcus. We need a confession of the forgery." Alejandro reached out, his hand hovering over mine before he finally closed the distance, his fingers warm and steady. "Then we give him a reason to brag. We'll leak a fake story that you're planning to fire him and sign with a rival agency. He'll scramble to release this scandal footage to ruin you before you can leave. And when he does, we'll be there to catch him at the source." I looked at our joined hands. "You're putting a lot on the line for me, Alejandro." "Why?" "Because," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate vibration, "I've spent my whole life surrounded by actors. But I've never seen a performance as brave as the one you're giving right now. You're not just playing a part, Valentina. You're fighting for your soul. I find that I very much want to be on the winning side of that fight." "The trap is set for the premiere party on Friday," I said, my voice finally steady. "That's when he thinks he'll have his final victory. Then Friday is when we show him the difference between a soap opera and reality." Alejandro promised. Friday night arrived with a kind of electric, heavy tension that precedes a massive summer storm. The Grand Regal Hotel was a cathedral of gold leaf and crystal, swarming with the city's elite, all gathered for the premiere of the Sombras de Amor finale. The red carpet was a gauntlet of blinding flashbulbs and screaming reporters. In my previous life, this would have been the beginning of the end, the night the first scandal video hit the internet while I was too sedated to defend myself. Luis was glued to my side, his hand clamped firmly around my waist in a gesture that looked like affection to the cameras but felt like a shackle to me. He leaned in, his breath smelling of celebratory champagne and cold ambition. "Smile, Val," Luis hissed under his breath, his teeth bared in a theatrical grin for the photographers. "This is your big night. Just stay upright and don't trip. I've already told the press you're feeling fragile because of the emotional weight of the scene. It's perfect." "I'm smiling, Luis," I said, pitching my voice into that airy, slightly vacant tone I had been using to deceive him. Inside, my heart was a drum of war, beating against the recording device taped to my ribs. "I just feel a little dizzy. Maybe it's the lights." "That's the vitamins doing their job," he whispered, his grip tightening. "Just let me do the talking." We were ushered away from the carpet and into a private VIP lounge behind the ballroom. The room was silent, a stark contrast to the roar of the crowd outside. Alejandro Santoro was standing by a massive mahogany desk, looking lethal and magnificent in a tailored tuxedo. He didn't look like a media mogul. He looked like a king preparing for a conquest. "Mr. Santoro," Luis said, his voice dripping with that oily, false deference that used to fool me. "Thank you for the private audience. Valentina is a bit overwhelmed, but we're ready to discuss the renewal. It's time to settle the future of this network's greatest asset, Alejandro said, his voice a deep, smooth baritone that seemed to vibrate in the very air. He didn't even glance at Luis. His eyes were locked on mine, sharp and knowing. He gestured to the desk, where two thick leather folders lay waiting. I have the contracts here, Miss Vega. I've made some adjustments to the terms as we discussed. Adjustments? Luis asked, his eyes narrowing as he tried to step toward the desk. I need to review those first. I'm her manager. Nothing gets signed without my stamp. Alejandro stepped into Luis's path, his physical presence overwhelming the smaller man. This is a private matter for the talent, Luis. Valentina is an adult. She can read. I'm fine, Luis, I said, stepping past him. I felt the heat radiating from Alejandro as I moved into his space. I reached for the pen. There were two folders. The first was the standard renewal contract, the one Luis expected. But the second was the secret, the Articles of Incorporation for Vega Productions. It granted me a multi-million-dollar budget, full creative control, and severed all ties with Luis's management firm effective immediately. I signed both with a hand that didn't shake. I felt a surge of intoxicating, raw power as the ink dried. What is this? Luis shouted, finally pushing past Alejandro to look at the papers. He saw the name Vega Productions and the termination clause. His face went from a healthy tan to a sickly, mottled purple. Valentina? What have you done? You can't sign this. This isn't what we agreed on. It's exactly what I agreed on, I said, my voice dropping the drugged act instantly. I stood tall, my spine like a column of steel. I've exercised the morality clause in our contract, Luis. I'm terminating you for cause. Fraud, embezzlement, and the intentional sabotage of my reputation. Luis let out a harsh, jagged laugh. Cause? You have no cause. You're a mess, Valentina. You're a drug-addicted soap star who can't even remember her own lines. Who are they going to believe? Me, or the girl who needs vitamins just to get through a premiere? I haven't taken a single pill you've given me in a week, Luis, I said, pulling the recording device from the hidden slit in my gown and holding it up for him to see. And every word you've said tonight, and every day this week, is on a server in Alejandro's office. The vitamins, the gaslighting, the plan to cook the golden goose. It's all there. Alejandro stepped up beside me, his hand resting supportively on the small of my back. The police are already in the building, Luis. And in 3 minutes, the scandal you were so excited to release is going to play on every screen in the ballroom, but it won't be the version you edited. It'll be the raw footage of you creating the lies. Luis looked at the door, then back at us, his eyes wide with a frantic, animal terror. The curtain was falling, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't the director. He was the villain about to be caught. This is a mistake, Luis stammered, his voice cracking. Valentina, honey, think about what you're doing. I am thinking, Luis, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I'm thinking about the balcony. And this time, you're the one who's falling. The silence in the VIP lounge was so brittle it felt like it would shatter at the slightest breath. Luis stood paralyzed, his eyes darting from the recording device in my hand to the icy, immovable silhouette of Alejandro Santoro. For years, Luis had been the puppet master, pulling my strings from the shadows, convincing me that the world was a predatory place, and he was my only shelter. Now, the lights had been turned on, and he was revealed for exactly what he was, a small, desperate man holding on to a fading lie. You're bluffing, Luis finally spat, though his voice lacked its usual venomous bite. It was thin, reeking of a man who was already drowning. You wouldn't risk the scandal, Valentina. If those videos go out, even if they're edited, your career is over. The public doesn't care about the truth. They care about the drama. You'll be a pariah. That's where you're wrong, Luis, I said, stepping toward him. Each click of my heels against the marble floor felt like a nail in his coffin. The public loves a drama, yes, but they love a redemption story even more. And they absolutely hate being lied to. Alejandro checked his watch, a slow, deliberate movement. 3 seconds, Luis. The premiere is beginning. He walked over to the heavy velvet curtains that separated the VIP balcony from the grand ballroom below and pulled them wide. Below us, a sea of 3,000 people, investors, actors, journalists, and fans, sat in hushed anticipation. The massive digital screens that were supposed to show the finale of Sombrasto Amor flickered, then went black. A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. Luis rushed to the railing, his knuckles white as he gripped the gold-plated banister. "What are you doing?"
Stop it.
"Stop it right now," he screamed, but his voice was drowned out by the sudden roar of the sound system. The screens didn't show the soap opera. They showed a grainy, raw video of a darkened office, Luis's office. On screen, a digital timestamp showed it was from 3 weeks ago. The crowd went silent as they watched the video of Luis sitting at his computer, laughing as he used an AI voice modulator to make my voice say horrific things about the network's fans. "Just a little more distortion," the Luis on the screen said, his voice echoing through the ballroom. "She'll be so broken after this leak that she'll sign anything I put in front of her. She's my golden goose, and it's time to pluck her." The collective gasp from the 3,000 people below was a physical force, a wave of shock that seemed to rattle the chandeliers. Then, the screen cut to a montage of the fake videos he had prepared, side by side with the original, unedited footage of me simply sleeping or rehearsing. "You bitch!" Luis roared, turning on me with a face contorted by animalistic fury. He lunged, his fingers curling like claws, but he never reached me. Alejandro moved with the lethal grace of a predator. He stepped in front of me, catching Luis by the throat and slamming him against the stone pillar of the balcony. The impact was sickeningly loud. "I told you," Alejandro growled, his voice a low, terrifying vibration that made the air feel heavy. "You do not touch her. Not ever again. Let me go." Luis wheezed, his legs kicking uselessly. "I made her. She's nothing without me." "She was always everything," Alejandro said, his eyes burning with a dark, protective fire. "You were just the parasite that tried to convince her she was small." The ballroom below had erupted into a chaos of shouting and camera flashes. The reporters were no longer looking at the screen. They were looking up at us, their lenses zooming in on the man being held by the throat and the woman standing tall beside him. The heavy doors of the VIP lounge burst open, and 4 uniformed police officers streamed in, followed by the network's head of security. "Luis Moreno?" the lead officer asked, his hand on his holster. "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and criminal harassment. Drop him, Mr. Santoro." Alejandro released his grip, and Luis slumped to the floor like a discarded rag doll. As the officers pulled him up and snapped the handcuffs onto his wrists, Luis looked at me one last time. There was no love in his eyes, no regret. Only a hollow, terrifying void. "You'll regret this, Valentina," he screamed as they dragged him toward the exit. "You're nothing. You're just an actress." "No, Luis," I said, watching him disappear through the doors. "For the first time in my life, I'm not acting at all." I walked to the edge of the balcony and looked down at the sea of lights. The cameras were all on me. I felt Alejandro's hand find the small of my back, a solid, warm anchor in the storm of the tonight's victory. "The show is over, Valentina," Alejandro whispered. "No," I replied, a small, triumphant smile touching my lips. "The prologue is over. The story is just beginning." 1 year had passed since the night the digital screens of the Grand Regal Hotel turned into a guillotine for Luis Moreno's career. In the industry, a year can be an eternity, but for me, it had been a single, breathless exhale. The world no longer called me the Queen of Soaps, with that condescending tilt of the head. Now they called me a visionary. Vega Productions was no longer just a name on a secret contract. It was a powerhouse that had spent the last 12 months proving that the truth, when told with enough fire, was the most profitable story of all. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my dressing room at the National Film Awards. I wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that seemed to swallow the light, its structure sharp and regal. It was a far cry from the delicate, fragile lace Luis used to dress me in to reinforce my image as a victim. My hair was pulled back in a sleek, uncompromising bun, and my makeup was minimal, highlighting the strength in my jaw rather than the sorrow in my eyes. "The car is idling downstairs, Valentina," a familiar, deep voice said from the doorway. I turned and felt a genuine smile break across my face. Alejandro Santoro was leaning against the doorframe, looking devastating in a tuxedo that fit him like armor. He wasn't the brooding, distant mogul who had once signed my pink slip. Over the last year, he had become the anchor I never knew I needed, the man who sat with me in the editing bay until dawn, debating the pacing of a scene, and the partner who never once tried to tell me how to play my own life. "I'm almost ready," I said, reaching for my evening bag. I was just remembering the last time I stood in a dressing room before a big event. I was hiding pills in my cheeks and praying the world wouldn't see me shatter. Alejandro walked into the room, his presence filling the space with a warm, steady energy. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "That Valentina is a character you've retired, my love. Tonight is about the woman who wrote the script." He opened the box to reveal a necklace of raw, uncut sapphires. He stepped behind me, his fingers warm against the skin of my neck as he fastened the clasp. I caught his gaze in the mirror. "You've been remarkably quiet about the nominations," Alejandro said, his eyes meeting mine in the reflection. "The critics are calling The Glass Balcony the frontrunner for Best Picture. Are you nervous?" "I'm not nervous about the awards, Alejandro," I said, turning in his arms to face him. I already won the moment I walked out of that courtroom and realized I didn't have to look over my shoulder anymore. Everything else is just a victory lap. "Luis's final appeal was denied this morning," Alejandro said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "He'll be in that cell for the next 9 years. The industry has moved on so completely that even the tabloids have stopped printing his name. He is a ghost, Valentina." "Let the ghosts stay in the dark," I said, placing my hand over his heart. I could feel its steady, rhythmic beat, a stark contrast to the frantic, hollow heart of the man I had escaped. "I want to talk about us. About tonight." "Tonight," Alejandro said, leaning down until his forehead rested against mine. "I get to be the man on the arm of the most powerful woman in the room. And I intend to enjoy every second of it." "You are the only one who saw me when I was invisible," I whispered. "I didn't see a victim," Alejandro said, his hand cupping my cheek. "I saw a queen who just needed a better kingdom. And look at what you've built." We walked out of the dressing room together, our footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. As we reached the exit, the roar of the crowd outside grew louder, the sound of thousands of fans waiting for a glimpse of the woman who had come back from the dead. We stepped out onto the red carpet, and the world exploded into a symphony of light. The flashbulbs were as bright as the fire I had once feared, but they didn't burn me. I stood tall, my hand linked firmly with Alejandro's, and looked directly into the lenses. I didn't need a script. I didn't need a director. "Valentina, over here. How does it feel to be back?" a reporter shouted from the barricade. I stopped and looked at the camera, a calm, radiant smile on my lips. "I'm not back," I called out, my voice steady and clear. "I'm finally here." As we moved toward the theater, the wind picked up, but it didn't feel like the wind on the balcony. It felt like a fresh start. The Queen of Soaps was gone, buried under the weight of her own tragedy, and in her place stood a woman who knew that the only way to truly survive the fall was to learn how to fly.